are listening to the Happiest Girl in the Room podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Happiest Girl in the Room podcast, also known as the Happiest Diaries. And today, I'll be speaking on the topic forgiveness. Okay, so forgiveness can be one of the most difficult things to do on the path towards healing. But I tell you, it is also one of the most necessary. So let's start. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is that deliberate decision and intentional act of letting go of resentment or anger towards someone who has hurt you, regardless of whether they actually deserve it or not. See what I said there? The writer. I said regardless of whether they deserve it or not. Yeah. Because forgiveness is personal. It may seem like you're doing it for someone, when in actual fact, it's an act that is done by you, for you. So forgiveness is for you because it gives you peace. It allows you to focus on yourself while you move on with your life. So now that I think I've tried to explain what forgiveness is, let me try and explain what forgiveness is not. So when someone offends you and you choose to gloss over it, you don't speak about it, you sometimes even deny the hurt or the pain that a person has caused, and you think that's forgiveness. It's not. You can decide not to speak about something, and you can harbor hateful thoughts about the person that did that thing to you. Right? So that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness does not also mean that we condone hurtful acts or we excuse offenses. It also doesn't mean that we forget. In fact, let me say this one on the rooftop because it's one of the most erroneous statements ever made. When people say forgive and forget, it's a load of bull, believe me, because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It also doesn't mean that you have to make up with the person who caused you harm. Because the act that hurt you will always be there forever, unfortunately. The mind isn't like a computer where you just control delete and everything goes away. No. Sometimes for your emotional well-being, you might just want to stay away from that thing, that situation, or that person that hurt you, even though you've forgiven them. So that forgive and forget is not something that easily happens. It happens sometimes for some people, but for most people, it's not as easy as that. So, and then forgiveness can also help repair a damaged relationship, but it also doesn't obligate you to reconcile with the person who has hurt you, and it doesn't even release that person from legal accountability, as the case may be. I say that because I remember I watched a video on YouTube in the United States where a man had killed a young girl. I can't remember for the reason, but judgment was served. And the parent of the deceased girl chose to forgive the killer. Yeah, they did an interview and said they'd forgiven him. But you see, even though they said they had forgiven him, he still had to face the consequences of his actions, which was a lifetime in jail. I was just trying to buttress that point that some actions do have consequences, and forgiveness wouldn't necessarily absorb you from the consequences of those actions. So let's look at the Bible and what the Bible says about forgiveness. The Bible in Ephesians 4:32 tells us to be kind and to be compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ forgave us. See, so from that scripture, I think forgiveness is grace, because no one is perfect and we've all made serious mistakes. So no one can possibly say that even as Christians we obey God's commandment every day, every second, every minute, that type of thing. Nobody can say that we obey God's commandment perfectly. Nobody can obey any set of rules perfectly. And that's why God has called forgiveness grace. If you look again in Ephesians 2:8, the Bible says that, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is a gift from God, you see. So that's gift is grace. And that's the way I say it. So the way God forgives us, not because of what we do or what we don't do. So God forgives us unconditionally. That's why He says it's a gift. He said, for grace you've been saved through faith. So it's grace that saved us, not because of what we did. It is not by your own doing. And that's how God loves us and forgives us unconditionally. It's not about what we do or what we don't do. And as tough as it may be, if we say we are of Christ, we have to learn to recreate that grace in our lives for people all around us. So I understand that my capacity to forgive doesn't depend on anyone's behavior or doesn't require anyone's permission. I forgive because it's God's grace in me. The way God forgave me or forgives me on a regular is the way I forgive everyone around me. And, the person I forgive can continue to be cruel, can continue to be, thoughtless and relentless against me. But it has nothing to do with the other person or the other party. Forgiveness is a you thing, is a personal thing. And that's why, forgiveness is grace. Yeah, and that's what the Bible teaches us. However, also very important to mention that forgiveness is no justification to allow people to continually hurt you all the time because they think you would always forgive them. I ask grace for forgiveness, so we can hurt her all the time. She would forgive us. No. In fact, let me go back to what I said about forgiveness and reconciliation. So if someone chooses to hurt you and you forgive, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stay in that relationship. You can forgive and love someone from afar for so many good reasons. And, it just means that I can forgive someone for damaging our relationship. And because I don't feel safe enough to resume that relationship, I might just choose to, stay away. There are so many reasons. If you don't feel safe in a relationship, in a friendship any longer, you don't have to be in that friendship because you're forgiving and you think reconciliation is a must. No. If the person who has hurt you is not remorseful, or if you think or you realize that the hurt will continue to reoccur, that's enough grounds to say, okay, I forgive you, but I have to remove myself from this situation. Let me give a quick example. I had this really close friend that was literally like my sister. Like I would call her my sister. That's how close we were. But I remember after my husband's passing, this is my sister friend, she acted oblivious to my pain. She just carried on with her life like business as usual, as if nothing happened in my life, like not talk of something that's significant. She just carried on like that. And this went on for a year because I literally kept extending grace, and because I knew her well enough to understand her thought process. But after a year, I just knew that I had to have a conversation about it because it began to bother me that even strangers seem to care more about my wellness and my recovery than this so-called sister friend of mine. Anyways, we had the conversation and it ended terribly. She got really defensive, which I expected, to be honest. And she said a lot of hurtful things. Again, as I said, because I know her well enough, I wasn't surprised at the outcome. So honestly, before I went into that conversation, I already played out in my mind the scenario. And I knew that, there was a huge chance of it going the way it did. So that's why, I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. Because I thought our relationship, is bigger or would be bigger than her ego. And she would listen with empathy. But, it didn't. She didn't. I recalled I still tried reaching out to her a few days later, only to realize that she had decided to hold a grudge, She wasn't picking my calls, that sort of thing. So I decided to give her space. That's one thing I do, because I fully understand that, people process and people deal with things differently. So if I reach out to you and you are giving me silent treatment, I'll just give you space, because I'll interpret it as you need space. And so I gave her space. The space lasted for over a year. So fast forward to over a year later, she reaches out to me asking for forgiveness and reconciliation. And I was sort of excited to have my friend back. So I came into the relationship thinking that we would just pick up from where we left off. But it didn't take me long to realize that her reconciliation efforts were not genuine, and she still harbored some resentful thoughts about me in her mind. To cut the long story short, after initiating a series of conversations and having these discussions and trying to make things right, I just realized that we were in this unhealthy cycle of things are fine today, things are bad tomorrow. Things will seem okay today, before you know it, her nasty attitude will resurface a few weeks later. So it just kept going on and on like that. And it took the Holy Spirit to eventually let me see that this relationship was no longer safe for me. I could keep forgiving this babe over and over 1,000 times, but she would forever continue to seek out something I did wrong to justify her own terrible actions of abandoning me when I needed her the most. Honestly, that was what the Holy Spirit revealed to me. She had distorted the entire thing, the entire story of what happened in her head, and she was telling anyone that mattered to both of us her own distorted version, because she knew that if anyone would hear the real story of how she left me in my time of grief, people would call her out for it. So I think her inability to be accountable added to that guilt of how she acted, and then also her coming back into my life and seeing how much I've grown, how my life had changed for better. I think all of that put her in a mindset where she would constantly be seeking out wrongdoing from me. I know it sounds complicated, but trust me, the Lord has blessed me with such a great level of intuition these days that it surprises even me. So for real, I knew her issues were beyond me, and as much as I love her, I knew I just had to let the relationship go, because it wasn't safe. It wasn't safe for me. It was no longer healthy, and I just had to remove myself from that situation. That's just an example of how reconciliation is a multiple person process, and it's the fact that you forgive someone or someone forgives you doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, and that's okay. And since we're on that topic, it's not right, it's not fair that you hurt someone and expect things to return a certain type of way that things were before, just automatically. It doesn't happen like that. Reconciliation is a multiple person process that requires multiple person work. And if one person is doing the work and the other isn't, it's not going to work out. If one person feels unsafe and chooses not to reconcile or not to reconnect, that's also okay, because their feelings are valid. In this case, you as a wrongdoer, you have to be willing to do the work, the extra work needed to help the other person feel safe again and be able to resume the relationship. And that requires patience, and that requires intentionality. And if you cannot do that, then I don't think you should expect automatic reconciliation, because I think that's just seriously selfish and entitled behavior. Yeah. So seeing that I'm getting really vulnerable in this episode, let me continue on this path a bit and speak about how forgiveness has helped me on my journey to healing. And by the way, forgiveness in my situation seems to be a present continuous concept, because the things that I have forgiven people for, they still continue to do. So I have to keep on forgiving. I recall I recall after Shaya passed, I started to hear stories about how I was responsible for his death. And unfortunately, I heard these tales were being told by people who once said I was part of their family. And sadly, it seems that they are yet to stop because I have chosen to remove the accessibility they have to my life. Imagine people just defame you like that. But remember what I said about removing oneself from relationships or situations that can cause you pain, or situations where you feel unsafe. Well, I think that this is the case here. I don't feel safe mentally, emotionally in that relationship, at least not yet. And so I removed myself from... Okay, let me take you back to episode 2, I think, when I mentioned that there was a lot of experiences that I didn't write about in my book because I didn't want my book to be some sort of smear campaign, but a true manuscript for healing. A lot of things I went through that were a lot of things that I chose not to write about. And that's because I extended the grace of forgiveness by choosing not to recount in print some of the hurtful things I've had to endure. And that's what I've always tried to do. Extend grace to people who hurt me, who have chosen to defame me in their pain. It is, however, very unfortunate that these same people don't think I deserve grace in return. So after Shaya passed, a lot was said about me, just to tarnish my image and paint me as the person that I wasn't, in a bid to label me as the one responsible for his passing. Very cliche, I know. Blame the wife for the passing of the husband, blah, blah, blah. I don't know why we still do that, really. And I'm really, really trying not to say anything bad about Shaya, mostly because I do not want my children to be tainted by what they know absolutely nothing about. Not now, not ever. But let me try and share a bit without any messiness. Where do I begin? So I married my late husband, of course, and as it is in this climb, when you marry the entire family. And I did all I could possibly do to show love and to gain acceptance and respect from my in-laws, even when their son acted out of line. I carried them along and not in any way disrespected them and all of that. But after his death, it's sad that the only thing that they have chosen to do is make me out as the bad guy. I've heard a lot of horrible things being said about me, how I triggered this, or I could have done this better, or I should have done this, etc, etc. Meanwhile, I carry them along through all the issues that we had in our marriage, by the way. But here we are in the middle of pain and grief, and this was a reaction. But I chose to keep silent. The reaction wasn't fair, wasn't true, but I chose to be silent because I thought to myself, you must be hell to lose a son. So let me allow them grief. Let me allow them, express the pain however they want to. It's not right. I'm not saying it's right to hurt someone else in your pain, but because I'm a very empathetic person, I said it must be tough. It must be hell, in fact. So let me not say anything. But the truth is, the defamation then was bad. Now it's worse. And in actual fact, yes, it is indeed hell to lose a son. I pray to never experience it. And I pray for anyone listening that you also never get to experience it. But we need to be mindful. We also need to extend grace to people. And we need to know that it's not acceptable to bleed on people who don't deserve it because you're hurting. You can't be bleeding on people who were also bleeding. In my case, I was also bleeding. So it wasn't right. Let's call it what it is. It's sad. It was really a sad thing to have happened. But you being in pain is not enough to cause someone else pain. It's not enough to bleed on other people. Especially people that were caught. Yes, you were caught and you're bleeding, but you're bleeding on someone else who was also caught and who was also bleeding. And I absolutely didn't deserve it. And if they're being truthful to themselves, they 100% also know that I didn't deserve what they chose to do to me. They know. Deep down, they do know. Because if I begin to tell all of the tales of my experiences, in fact, I don't think anyone will believe me. You'll think it's like it's one Nollywood series. And frankly, I do not even want to open up old wounds. So I just keep a lot to myself. But the point I want to make is, I carried his family along. And so it was a shock to me how I became a villain. You know what? I was scrolling through social media the other day and I saw a lady's post saying something around your husband's family will always support him no matter what. And, well, my case lets me know that is in fact very true. I don't know if I should say this, but it just popped in my head. Did you know that my late husband's mom sent me a WhatsApp message, which I still have till today, by the way, not because I'm keeping it, but because I hardly delete chats on my phone, so it's still there. And in the message, she was telling me that I was responsible for her son's death. She wrote, I quote, "Stop grieving. After all, you are happy he is dead." As in the height of the pain and the height of the grief. Imagine getting this sort of message. It was really damning. Like, why would she think that it was okay to send me that hurtful message? I would never know. But I forgave her. And it hurt so bad, but I forgave her. But I'm yet to forget. And that's what I said about this forgiving and forgetting thing. It's not so easy, especially when the cut goes deep and you still wear the scars. It's like when you fall or when something happens and you get injured. Even though the wound may heal, the scar may never disappear. And sometimes when it seems like you've forgotten, if you see the scar, it just serves like a constant reminder of the experience. And I think that's the case here. Because honestly, I'm speaking about it now. And I'm not feeling the pain that I used to feel about it. You get? But I can still remember and I can still talk about it. And as someone who did love my late husband unconditionally, I didn't deserve the kind of treatment that I received from most of his family members after the tragedy happened. I didn't deserve it. Unfortunately, there's so many widows with this sort of tales, getting blamed for what is not their fault. Many even have it worse than I did. And because we live in such a broken society, it has become normal. But it is not. It shouldn't be. I'm sure there are some who didn't have to go through this double whammy of pain because the family treated them in love. That is how it should be. In fact, I know of 2 examples. One lady whom I met during my sister's wedding introduction. You know how introduction ceremonies go. Everybody has a chance to introduce themselves because it's mainly a family thing. And so when she introduced herself with a different surname, she followed up by saying, she was a former wife. She married their son. And although the son had passed, this family took good care of her to the point that he was the father who gave her away when she remarried. So she had remarried, yeah, but here she was, still part of the family. So she said, even though she's remarried, she's still their wife and she's still their daughter. And that's why she was present at the introduction. And it absolutely warmed my heart. And, I just knew that, my sister was married into an amazing family. Then the second example, I remember speaking to someone at work who had lost her brother. And I indeed wanted to know how the family treated the wife. I wanted to know what her relationship is with a brother's widow. So I actually casually asked the question, so how's your relationship with your brother's wife? Are you guys still friendly like you were, etc, etc? And then she began to tell me about how they're still very cool. She expressed empathy about how they knew that it must be so tough for a young lady to be saddled with a responsibility that was meant for two people. Now she has to do everything by herself. So they try to support her so she doesn't feel alone. She even gave examples of how they're supporting. In fact, she says they try to do everything that they know should have been her brother's responsibility. So they pay the school fees, the house where they live, they pay for the rent annually. They pay for it. She says that they also send the widow upkeep money monthly for the kids. And, so she says because if her brother was alive, that he will be doing all of that. So it's not fair for them to just abandon the wife and let her do everything by herself. So the responsibility that would have been her brother's, they still do. And I was like, oh, wow, she's so lucky. She's extremely fortunate because, wow, that's amazing. I was happy to hear that. And, to which she responds to me, what do you mean lucky? We're just doing what we're supposed to do. It's the least we could do. Given everything she's gone through, she's the least we could do. So there's nothing about luck there. It's just them being responsible people. And, she stated emphatically that her brother's children are children. So that's how she put it. My brother's children are my children. So why won't we do what we're supposed to do? And why would we put everything on their mother? No, we won't do that. And then she proceeded to ask me, because of course she knew about my situation. She proceeded to ask me if I was getting that kind of support from my late husband's family. To which I laughed because, oh my God, what support? What support, really? People that took from the final entitlements that his workplace should have handed to his children. Imagine taking from children who were barely 2 years and 5 months old at the time of their father's death. So what support? What support? Please. God is my source. God is my sole source. Is my strength. Is my support. Is everything. So let me not even begin to talk or to explain. And as I said, I've chosen to extend grace. If only they could extend that same grace to me. If only. As we say in Yoruba, Orokpo, which means talk is plenty. Talk is plenty. There are a lot of things that I can say or I would like to say even, but because I'm a kind person, I wouldn't. And because for me, I would prioritize my emotional well-being, my mental health, and of course, prioritizing my children and their mental health and their emotional health, and not wanting to expose them to anything that might harm them now or even later. So I'm just gonna not speak. But the truth is, kindness isn't synonymous with foolery. So let nobody say because I is not speaking, I is a fool. I think people that know me well enough will know that by now. You can take me for a ride. Nah, I'm very measured and I'm also very intentional. So you can take me for a ride. Let's just put it that way. So, and I'm still on my healing journey. And forgiveness is a big part of healing. But you can't control how people heal. You can't control the reaction to whatever it is that got the relationship damaged. If you want to pull back a relationship, you have to put in the work. But if the other party doesn't want to reconcile, their feelings are absolutely valid. You have to deal with it. Honestly, except you're really ready to put in a lot of work, but you have to deal with it. Therapy taught me to be selfish with my emotions, to protect my peace, and to stay away from my trauma triggers. So if I'm staying away from a situation, it's for me. I'm selfish about my emotions. I'm selfish about my mental and emotional wellness. And I don't apologize for that selfishness. There are just a few things I'm selfish about, and these are one of those things. I have chosen my peace, my sanity, and you don't have a right to have a problem with that. You shouldn't. Nobody should take offense if you choose to prioritize your mental and your emotional health, because it's very important for our overall well-being. So, dear listeners, I think this is probably going to be one of the longest episodes by far since I started. And I hope that you've enjoyed my vulnerability. So, dear listeners, I would say forgive. But that forget that people always add is one of the most erroneous statements ever uttered. You can always forgive, but it's not like you have amnesia. Forgetting rarely happens. And that's why people always say experience is a teacher. If you forget, how are you supposed to learn from those experiences? It's okay to forgive and move on, but don't let anyone use that forgive and forget phrase to emotionally blackmail you. It's okay to forgive someone and not want reconciliation, because you don't feel safe in that relationship, or whatever it is that happened you feel is likely to reoccur because the person has not really understood the gravity of their actions, or you don't even think that being in that situation or being in that relationship fuels the positivity that you need in your life. And that's absolutely fine. You shouldn't have to explain that to anyone. If nobody wants to understand, that's on them, that's not on you. So if you wronged someone and they move away from you, please know that they may have forgiven you, but they just don't feel emotionally safe to be in that relationship with you. It's not your right. Reconciliation is not your right. It's not an entitlement, and it's not something to be forced. If you want the relationship restored, then you need to put in the work with intentionality and with patience. So, me, God knows, I've never known how to hold a grudge, because nobody has that much power over me. I don't give that power to anyone. To be honest, I don't. I'm just too concerned with chasing my peace, my joy, and most importantly, chasing heaven. If anyone hurt me, I forgive you. It's just that some of these actions are quite heavy, and the scars are quite huge, and they can't be hidden. So it will make forgetting difficult, and I just also in that place where I think that, okay, this is not working out and this is not where I want to be, and I remove myself. And also, if I've ever wronged you, or by your interpretation you think I'm the villain in your story, for your own healing, I hope you do forgive me as well. And finally, I can't believe I have to say this, but let me say it. Africans, Nigerians, if a man dies, you do not have to blame the wife. It's not automatic. Don't just look to the wife as your emotional punching bag and begin to bleed on her, because she's also bleeding. Don't add to her pain. Don't break her and then act surprised when she reacts. People, you do not have to hurt someone else because you've been hurt. You do not have to bleed on other people because you are bleeding. You need to learn to deal with your emotions so that your loved ones do not have to suffer through your trauma. Till we speak again. Thank you very much for listening to the Happiest Girl in the Room podcast, also known as the Happiest Diaries. Enjoy your week. This is one long one, so if I don't post for 1 month, I think that's okay, because it's been crazy getting the time to even record. But thank you for everyone who is listening. And I'll really, really, really try and keep this very consistent. So, ciao, bye-bye. You're listening to the Happiest Girl in the Room podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Happiest Girl in the Room podcast.